Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called The Cats of Ulthar, an adaptation of a story by H.P. Lovecraft, written for you by Daniel Hinds. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! The Cats of Ulthar. I grew up in a little village called Ulthar, where things were pretty normal for the most part. There was a baker and a blacksmith, a tinker and a tailor, a cobbler and a cooper, and, like all little villages, we even had a creepy old house. Some creepy old houses are tall and dark, looming on hills like vultures waiting to pick clean the bones of a village. Others are rooted rock, old and mossy and faded like headstones in a forgotten graveyard. In Ulthar, our creepy old house was a sagging cottage, fronted by a yard gone wild with weeds. It was tucked deep under gnarled old oak trees, so that it was always in the dark, night or day, and forever smelled like fungus and stagnant water and things better left hidden away. The creepy old house. It's funny. I know it's close to Halloween, but that's not what got me thinking about it. It actually came to my mind because I saw my cat Pluto warming up by the fire. I was watching him stretch and curl and wiggle, and the story came bubbling up inside me, fast and hot, like I had eaten something sour, if that makes any sense. Pluto, my lovely and annoying cat, is a velvety black, with eyes a pale yellow like a harvest moon, and the creepy old house once took her from me. I got her back, but it was a close thing, and I still thank my lucky stars to have him. Well, that's not exactly true. I do thank my lucky stars, but really, mostly, I thank the witches. I guess I should explain. It was 2 years ago, when the creepy old house was still standing, before it had crumbled to a dusty dune of moldering mess and broken bricks. Back then, the Old Cotters, Mr. and Mrs., still lived there. They kept to themselves, which was a strange thing in our little village. No one ever saw them, except quick through the windows, and even then, the old couple would slam the shutters if you got a glimpse, and then they'd glare out through the cracks with hateful eyes. So yeah, the couple was creepy on their own, but what made their home so hated by everyone in the village was our cats. You see, Old Cotter and his wife hated cats. Just absolutely couldn't stand them. For years, they'd scream and cause a big fuss if so much as a whisker crossed into their yard. Some people even said they'd throw rocks and bottles if one got close to their windows. Terrible, right? So everyone thought it was strange when they tore up a big section of their wild weeds and planted a bed of catnip. That's right, catnip. It was lush and green and soft and simply irresistible to every feline in the village. Some people thought, well, maybe they'd change their ways, but that kind of talk didn't last for long. Because not 3 days after the catnip was planted, the cats started going missing. First, it was Miss Rachel's fat orange tabby. Then it was Stan and Sophia, the sweet grays who belonged to the painters at the end of the road. After that, the cats kept disappearing, one after another. Everyone suspected. No, everyone knew it was the Old Cotters' doing, but no one could prove it. Still, when you got close to their cottage, you could smell the stink of old litter, and if the wind was right, you could hear faint and terrible yowling screams. But only barely, and never quite loud enough to be sure. I was as worried as anyone, and I kept my little Pluto, just a kitten then, close to me all the time. He rode in the basket of my bike when I went to the store, and he slept on my bed all through the night. When I went outside to play with my friends, he would always be near at hand, chasing behind us or prowling after an unlucky bird. I loved that silly cat more than anything, and the day he went missing, I thought my heart would just shatter. Luckily for me, luckily for all of us in Ulthar, that was the same day the witches arrived. Ulthar wasn't exactly the middle of nowhere, but we also weren't any kind of a destination. Our little village got passing traders and tinkers and salesmen now and again, but that day, the strangest wagon I'd ever seen pulled into the main square, rumbling over the old cobblestones. It was big and boxy, like a rolling house, and the sides were painted with faded illustrations of cats and hawks and rams and lions, all with the heads and bodies switched around in a way that I found beautiful and terrible all at once. And if the wagon was strange, the people were even stranger. They looked different somehow. They had an air about them. They ranged from the oldest woman I had ever seen to a young boy with hair that fell in a limp wave down to his eyelashes. They all wore darkly patterned clothes, some in formal attire and others in wind-blown, billowing robes. They also had strange jewelry, clanking charms of bright metal mixed with bone and antler, and beads of colored glass and gemstone. I watched closely, fascinated, and I heard the adults around me all whisper that these were witches. I wasn't sure if I believed that at first, but they didn't sell food or supplies or even trinkets. No, they sold things I didn't think you could buy. For a coin, they would sing your future from the stars. For 2 coins, they would read your luck from the dregs of old tea leaves. They traded changing charms for warm wool and strange songs for fresh food. The old woman among them, who seemed to be in charge, would see people one by one, gazing deep into a ball of dark crystal that seemed to drink in the light like the ground took the rain. They were witches, all right, but I had to admit, they were altogether a nicer kind than I had read about in my stories. No one was turned into a frog or cursed with a cackling laugh. These were working witches. Women and men both, though the dark-haired boy couldn't have been much older than I was. Truth be told, I didn't believe much in magic back then. After a few hours of watching, I had decided the witches were nothing more than a particularly talented troupe of performers, all mysterious and interesting, but ultimately no different than you or me. Certainly, I thought, they didn't have any strange magical powers. Of course, I was wrong. Late afternoon, the day they arrived, the day the Old Cotters would steal Pluto into their creepy cottage, I came back into the village square on my bike. At that point, Pluto was still tucked into my basket, enjoying the breeze. I had heard the witches were leaving town that same night, and I wanted to watch them a little more before they went. When I pulled up, I spotted the boy sitting on the back of their wagon. He was feeding fresh fish to a tiny black kitten that looked so much like Pluto, she could have been his sister. "I like your kitten," I said to him after working up my courage. Pluto meowed from my bike basket, and the boy smiled up at us. He had a warm face and overlarge, friendly eyes, and when he spoke, he sounded younger than he looked. "Thanks," he said. "You too. My name is Menez, by the way." "I'm Macy," I said. He hopped down from the wagon and walked over to me, his kitten still in his arms. "And what's this fine gentleman's name?" he asked, petting my kitten as his own peered curiously into the basket. "This is Pluto," I said. "What about yours?" "This is Broomstick," he said. "It's a silly name, but it's her favorite place to sit." "I think it's a lovely name," I said, and I gave the kitten a scritch-scratch under the chin. We started talking while the older witches did their business, and it was actually really nice. Menez had been to far-off places I had never even heard of, and he told me about them in his excited but strangely quiet way. He spoke of black marshes and golden pyramids, of mountains so tall you couldn't see the peaks, and rivers so wide you couldn't see the shores. I told him about Ulthar, too, but our little village sounded extra small when he spoke of the great wide world. While we talked, we put the kittens down, and they were playing at our feet. They wrestled and rolled like kittens do and seemed to be fast friends. At least they were until a sudden squirrel shot across the road. It had the bushiest tail I had ever seen, and Pluto and Broomstick took off after it in a black, fuzzy flash. "Broomstick!" Menes cried. "Macy, we have to catch them!" "Quick, jump on my handlebars!" I said to the young witch. He hopped on, and together we took off on my bike, pedaling madly after the darting cats. They wound this way and that, chasing and playing, and always just out of reach. We hollered after them and chased and pedaled and ran and tried our hardest, but they were too quick. For a moment, we saw them pause and sniff at the air, and then they bolted another direction. We jumped off the bike and started running, but then we lost them in a tall patch of catnip. The one right in front of the Cotters' creepy old cottage. It was like magic. 1 second the kittens were there, and the next they were gone, disappearing in a blink, nothing but the smell of old litter and faint yowls in the distance. "Wait, what happened?" said Menes. "Where did they go?" I took his arm and pointed at the cottage. "That's the Old Cotters' place," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't want to believe that my cat was gone. It had happened so fast. But no one who lost their cat in this yard ever found them again. Not even once, not ever, and I said as much to Menes. "What do you mean?" he said. "They can't just take my cat." "We don't know that they took it," I said. "Cats just disappear around here. They disappear and they never come back." I started to cry then, full-on tears streaming down my face, my breath coming in big, hitching sobs. I wailed, sinking to the grass. "Pluto! My sweet Pluto!" Menes glared at the cottage, and inside we could see someone glaring back. From between the moldy blinds, an old bloodshot eye bored into us, and then the shutters snapped shut. Inside, maybe, we thought we could hear the kittens meowing and scared. "They're in there!" Menes shouted. "No one will believe us," I said, trying to wipe my eyes. The young witch thought for a long moment and then looked at the sun, low on the horizon. "Someone will," he said, helping me to my feet. "Come on!" He brought me and my bike back to the village square. It was nearing dusk by then, and much of the crowd had thinned out. Menes's friends were cooking dinner. If I hadn't been so sad, I would have been delighted to see they were doing it in a large, bubbling cauldron over a crackling fire, just like in my stories. At the moment, though, I was just in shock. The witches called out to us in friendly voices, but went quiet and pale when they saw our faces. My tears were still drying on my cheeks, and Menes was crying some himself. "What happened?" the old woman asked, taking our cheeks in her hands. "Menes, where's Broomstick?" He told them the story, his words coming out in a bitter, tumbling rush. Some folks from the village gathered around to hear it too, including my friend, Miss Rachel, who had lost her tabby some months before. "Someone has to stop that wicked couple," she said. "Poor Pluto makes more'n 20 cats we've lost this year." "No one should hurt a cat," the old witch said darkly. "Not ever." And I swear, the cauldron behind her started to bubble all the louder. "No one will do anything," I said. "We never have proof," Miss Rachel agreed. "We've talked to the constable, and he just said we should be happy we're missing cats and not kids, and that he has more important things to do than chase lost pets." "Broomstick is more than a pet," Menes said. "He's my friend." "Pluto, too," I said, my heart breaking. "Don't worry, little one," the old woman said, taking my hand in hers. She was surprisingly soft, with wizened wrinkles deep and dark. "We have a way with cats." "Is it catnip?" I said. People have tried, but the Cotters planted a whole patch. That's how they lure in the cats before they go missing. Not catnip, Menez said beside me. Better than catnip. Magic, the old woman said, and she threw a handful of something purple into the cauldron. Old magic. You see, cats speak the riddles of the Sphinx, but are more ancient still. Smoke rose from the cauldron, dark and purple and so thick you could chew it. It seemed I could see shapes in that smoke, shapes dancing and bending, shapes that looked like the same strange animals that were painted on the sides of their wagon. Cats have magic, and magic calls to magic like a mother calls you home, she crooned, and I felt my eyes growing heavy. Come home now, she cooed. Nice and easy, come on home. The purple smoke danced in front of me and inside my mind, wrapping thick and warm as a blanket, cozy and comforting, and I must have fallen asleep. Macy? Macy, wake up! I blinked my eyes open. I was on the ground, staring up at Miss Rachel. My head felt packed in cotton, my thoughts thick as winter honey. What happened? We fell asleep, I guess, Miss Rachel said. I shot up, remembering the witches and Menez and our poor kittens. Where'd they go? Where's the wagon? They're gone, Miss Rachel said, and she looked up at the rising moon. Long gone. We've been asleep for at least an hour, maybe even longer. I had more questions, but just then people started wandering into the village square around us. Mittens! Mittens! I heard a voice. Little Whiskers! Came another. Little Whiskers, where'd you go? Butterscotch! Butterscotch! I got up and looked around. From every direction, the people of the village were meeting in the center. They started to gather in loose clumps, and slowly the word got around that everyone was looking for their cat. And I mean everyone. Apparently, every cat in the entire village was missing, all at the same time. Some people started grumbling about the witches, but I didn't think that was right. If cats were missing, I knew it had something to do with the Old Cotters and their creepy cottage. They had gotten Pluto, and now they had gotten the rest of them, too. I don't know what came over me then, but I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. I swung onto my bike, ignoring Miss Rachel's calls, and I started pedaling like mad. I pedaled until my lungs were on fire and my legs ached, and in no time flat, I skidded to a stop in front of the creepy old cottage. And when I did, I froze in amazement. It was alive with cats. They swarmed over the yard and into the house. They climbed the walls and dangled from the roof. They prowled the weeds and scratched the wood, large and small, striped and spotted, black and gray and orange and white and every color in between. They were meowing and yowling and bawling and clawing, and at their head, leading them all, were Pluto and Broomstick. Pluto! I shouted. My kitten turned to look at me, and I swear he smiled a mischievous smile. A second later, the Cotter's door burst open and the couple stumbled into the yard. The mister had cats climbing up his legs and chewing on his coat, and the missus had Miss Rachel's fat orange tabby in her hair like a bad wig. They were scratched and scritched and hollering over and over. The words, "We're sorry! We're sorry!" echoing into the night. The cats all screeched back, and to be honest, it didn't sound like they accepted the apology. So it was. In a chorus of hisses and scratches and bites and angry yellow eyes, the creepy old couple disappeared into the darkness. They ran screaming down the road away from town, and they were never seen again. The cats didn't stop there, though. The swarm of them leapt and played and pulled at the house until, with a final lumbering groan, the entire cottage crumbled to the earth. The cats all leapt clear, letting out triumphant meows and then strutting away, a crowd of tails held high and proud. And that night, every cat that had gone missing found its way home. There were dozens on dozens of happy, teary, hugging reunions as the cats that had long been trapped in the cottage were finally back where they belonged, lying on their favorite spots by the hearth, surrounded by their families. My little Pluto ran up to me then and there and jumped into my arms. I hugged him so close and cried a little into his fur, and he meowed a little into my hair, and I've never been so happy and so relieved. And behind him, I saw little Broomstick. She wrapped around my legs and purred, her back arched and her eyes bright. I crouched down and scratched her under her chin, letting her lean into my hand with a happy gurgle. "Thank you," I said to her. "And tell Menez and the rest of the witches thank you, too." She nodded at me, which I would have found weird if not for everything else that had happened that day. And then, with a final nuzzle for me and a playful lick for Pluto, the little black kitten turned and walked down the road, following after her owners, whiskers twitching and tail swaying in the moonlight. So, that's my story, and that's what I think of when I see my Pluto. Not so little anymore, sleeping cozy by the fire. I know it's hard to believe, but that's what happened, and I needed to tell it. Pluto would back up my story if he could talk, but unfortunately, all he can do is meow and eat my snacks and get soft and round and happy. But honestly, that's good enough for me. The end. Thanks for listening.